Sure, thank you. And thank you for the panelists. I'm not sure I could talk nonstop for 2 hours, but uh, we thought in our planning of this that there was maybe four basic topics that would be good to talk about. First of all, I would say I remember a few years ago when somebody introduced me to the term black swan event. And if this doesn't qualify, I don't know what does. Something that none of us saw coming, something that is affecting everyone virtually. And even now, as it unfolds, something that continues to bring surprises and challenges as we deal with getting back to the workplace and finding out what in the world new normal looks like. So those four topics are the COVID experience so far, how it has impacted corporate workplace strategies and thinking, understand some of the latest trends in workplace strategies, and then looking forward, how are we going to adjust to the new normal? So on this first thing, the COVID experience, I guess I'll ask, and first of all, I would say that this panel represents a great cross section, because Travis has sort of gone through the experience of facing the variables and making decisions on what his new workplace is going to look like, implementing policies and protocols, et cetera, because construction on his new office space in Meridian is going to start very soon. And there was an awful lot of thinking and input and debate between the workplace strategist that was part of our team and the architect, et cetera, and coming up with a plan that we think is going to work really well, given what we're facing. On the other hand, Michelle, I think, is at the front end of this. Their lease isn't up for a while, so she's going to have to, as they return to work, look at what changes she wants to make to the space. But I don't think, and we'll hear more, that she's had to make hard decisions yet, like Travis did. Jillian, on the other hand, is working, and she's director of our National Workplace Strategy Group. She's working with a variety of firms who are probably anywhere in that spectrum. So let me, I guess, start with you, Travis. My first question, and I'm going to ask each of the three of you to give me a thumbnail, a sketch of an answer. How well do you think your firm has adapted to this 9-month work from home experiment? I mean, what was once sort of a talked about idea and sort of occasionally implemented, now we've had 9 months to experiment from work from home. Travis, first, how well do you think Richie May has adapted?
I guess I'd have to say I think they've adapted pretty amazingly, because we're a pretty traditional firm, lots of old guard kind of accountants here, and in the industry for decades. And so there was a lot of skepticism prior to COVID about working from home. We had allowed people to move out of state and continue to work remotely. But that even had some challenge and resistance. But when all this happened in March, everybody moved home. About 90% of our office moved home in about 24 hours. And we didn't skip a beat. It was the middle of busy season for us. The tax deadline on March 15th. Our auditors had a major deadline on March 31st. And we didn't skip a beat. So we adapted fairly well. I'm pretty happy with how that went.
Michelle, what do you think?
Well, I have to say that last year we did some major IT overhauls, and some people thought I had a crystal ball expected this to happen. So in December and January, we had launched laptops, which our attorneys didn't have prior. And it was almost like we had been planning to go remote. And so we kind of got lucky that we had done some IT overhauls and updated our infrastructure, and we were pretty ready for it in that regard. I remember in March convincing the management committee to close the office for a day. I had heard other people starting to do that, and our managing partner kind of fought me and said, do we really need to close for a whole day? And I said, well, they need 4 hours to test. We might as well just close for an entire day. We closed on Friday, March 13th to do testing, and we've never fully opened since. So we've adapted quite well. I have to say we were lucky in the upgrades we had done prior, and that day of testing was really helpful.
Well, can you imagine if let's go back 20 years and technology then compared to now, I think that your answers probably would have been quite different. Technology is in some ways saved the day here. Jillian, I would guess that you've seen a variety of responses, some who've maybe handled it better than others. How would you categorize what you're seeing?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference in between and among how small companies are handling and the nimbleness that they're able to have versus, mid-sized and even larger companies that have to take a much more thoughtful and rigid approach. It's one thing when you're dealing with maybe 20 employees and there's, a fair amount of just knowledge that, yeah, we're doing this together, it's no problem. And then when you scale that up to companies that have 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 employees across multiple offices, the question of what are we doing becomes a lot more complicated. Definitely some patterns were that pretty much everybody went home right around that same time. Twitter's one of our clients. They kind of led the charge and went home slightly earlier. But yeah, that kind of laughing at that March 13th, that Friday the 13th really kind of came in force this year for everybody. And then smaller companies are somewhat, still primarily work from home, somewhat going back together. Large companies obviously are talking about not till next year and likely Q3. So there's a difference in the return aspect, but everybody pretty much went home and has been, figuring out in varying degrees of how do we actually successfully work from home. And people are doing it, large scale, small scale, people are figuring it out and adapting.
So I saw a survey of CEOs, and one of the number one things they said they learned in this so far is what number of their people were truly essential employees. And I suppose some people ego might be affected if they learn whether they were or not. But Travis, what percentage of your employees did you have to categorize as essential and that needed to be in the office? And maybe that's zero now that everything's working great, but what would your answer be there?
Yeah, we it's been somewhat voluntary whether you're in the office. We're categorized as essential as a business. So we could have much more people than we have had, but we've allowed a lot of people to just be home if they're more comfortable with that or if it just works well. As far as what's essential, it's just a couple of the operations people dealing with mail and client payments and those type of things that I would say really have to be in the office. But we've also tried to put in place, since all this happened in March, better systems to be able to accept payments over the internet that we didn't have before. So things like that we've tried to adapt for this potential second wave or just other lockdowns that might come through the next couple of months.
Yeah. Michelle, how about at your firm?
So we are also essential. Law firms were dubbed essential early on. So we have about the same kind of setup as Travis mentioned, our mail room, our billing people, just a core team of about 5 that had been in the office the entire time. About middle of the summer, we did start to lift that. So I would say I have about 20 people in the office on a day. And of those 20, 3 of them are appointments. So we do have to have appointments for people that come in because we try to manage it. So we don't get an influx of a ton of people. We will allow a couple client meetings now. We have kind of designated rooms for them and a designated person that comes in and wipes everything down and all of that. Our floor used to kind of be a free flowing floor. It's not anymore. So you do have to have your access cards to enter. And so we do monitor who's coming and going and what number we're at. But really it was interesting. And, you know, all of our attorneys think that they're very important, and each of them are. But when it came down to it, our billing team and our office services team were really the most essential people to keep the firm up and running.
Yeah. Jillian, certainly essential employee, the answer here depends on what your company does and how it operates. I'm sure you've seen a wide variety of responses. How would you categorize companies' decisions on who essential employees are and how to manage that?
Some companies I've seen take as black and white of approach as, if you can't do the specific task from your home, then that's an essential task that needs to be performed at the office. So obviously, you know, things like mailroom, sometimes billing, there's special equipment that needs to be accessed. Then companies are usually drawing the line there. You know, a lot of companies also are, like I said, there's kind of, you know, these small categories, small business versus large business. Larger scale companies, I'm seeing a little bit more of certain teams being classified as needing to be in the office. And then there's obviously the various precautions that go around with that. But for the most part, I'm still seeing, you know, even with essential workers, maybe, you know, an office setting, probably 15 to 20% occupancy, depending on where people are at. Obviously right now in Denver, there's some additional restrictions beyond that, but companies are really trying to keep it low occupancy right now.
Great. I'll go back to you, Travis. I'm wondering how, with all of you, how your people have reacted. I hear a variety of stories of some that can't wait to get back to the office, some that never want to come back to the office. How have your people reacted, and have you done a official or formal survey of people to better inform you perhaps on how to make decisions on workplace going forward?
Yeah, as you were setting that up, I thought, I actually added up last night how many surveys we've done. It seems like a lot more, but it was about 10. I came up with about 10 or 12 throughout this whole process to just kind of understand, how's this going? What are your technology needs? Do you want to come back? You know, and some people misunderstood that actually. They had that in kind of a context of COVID. And so they said, for now, I'm fine. But, you know, ultimately, they probably want to come back. There are people that like it and want to stay home. I think since Bruce mentioned we're kind of barreling towards a new space here in the next 6 months. I think when they see the new space, they're going to want to come back.
Yeah.
I'm hoping our current space is a little worn and tired. So it's like, yeah, I'll just stay home. It's more comfortable here. But
Well, that was an interesting objective, as I recall, as we decided what to do. And that was you decided what to do, try to make the space a place that would be somewhat magnetic, a place that people would want to come into the office. And you guys gave a lot of conscious thought to features and design in that regard.
yeah, for sure. I mean, that's, yeah, obviously been a challenging project here in COVID, is making a 10-year commitment on a new space. But I think that there's been real good things. There's been increased productivity in some ways. In other ways, non-charge time probably includes a lot more walking the dog than we might like. You know, that type of thing. But I think there's been impacts on socialization and culture and even mental health. So I'm of the opinion people are going to want to come back. Some people enjoy working from home, and it's obviously nice to be in your jammies while you work, but people will want to come back, at least in large part.
Michelle, how have your attorneys reacted? And have you surveyed them on their thoughts?
So we have done some surveys, not quite as many as Travis. I think we've officially done 3. We are actually working on a more in-depth survey. We created what we call our Future of Work Committee, and the committee is supposed to kind of collect research just about what's happening out in our industry and just industries kind of across Denver to see, what we can develop and what questions we really want to dive into. And so we're really looking at doing that in the first quarter. But throughout the surveys I've taken, I would say we're a pretty split group. The attorneys had freedom before. Obviously, they had the autonomy to come and go as they pleased. And often, and this is not just our law firms get pretty quiet on Friday afternoons, especially if there's a good snow weekend coming up here in Denver and everybody's escaping to the mountains. So that's a hard thing already, is that the staff didn't have the same freedoms as the attorneys. And so that was something they were already asking. Actually, the managing partner and I had taken our paralegals out to lunch in February, and that was the #1 request from the paralegal group, is that they had more flexibility. I think they all went home and prayed super hard because that obviously came out this year. But I would say a lot of staff wants to maintain the flexibility. I do have some people that essentially never want to come back. They are willing to give up their offices. So we've already created hoteling environments. And we were already kind of working in that direction anyways to maximize our space. But I think we'll head down that road a lot more. I agree with your comments. And it's something, Bruce, that you and I have talked about, that the office is going to have to be magnetic in some way. It's going to have to draw people in. And we've, joked about adding tons of technology and creating less dedicated offices and more war rooms and collaboration space for us. And I would love to see that the future of the firm anyways, but technology will still play a heavy role and will be a big part of that draw to get people back in.
Yeah. Jillian, we're hearing from 2 people here who have, decided to solicit input and gather data and make their decisions based on that, which I personally think is smart, but I also know it's challenging to do that, because if I answer X and the company does Y, I say, well, thanks a lot for listening. Can you categorize that companies are taking the approach that Michelle and Travis are taking, or are you seeing, maybe especially with the bigger companies, the leadership just deciding what they're going to do?
Yeah, I think what I've seen has been pretty much most every company has done some sort of a survey. And what's really interesting about it is that it's a great way to get employee feedback on something. Some companies did a survey back in March, April, May of this year, and they might not have done any since. And then some companies, like Travis said, they've done about 10 this year, which is great. And I think what's important for companies to remember is that, yes, definitely gathering employee feedback is one portion of it. But ultimately what's going to have to happen is that companies' leadership is going to have to come together, via oftentimes committee, like Michelle was mentioning, take that feedback, but then also start to create the framework of what their future workspace needs to be. And that's really that time, these decisions around space and real estate will ultimately come down from the top. So definitely taking in employee feedback is great, but it's ultimately not an individual employee response, right? So there's going to have to be some balancing of saying, okay, employees, we've listened to you, and we have also balanced and weighed that out against what our company's business objectives are, and here's where we're landing and why. Because change management really is going to be an important part for every company moving forward. It's really got to be something where the messaging is set up around it, and the whys outweigh the what are we doing. Because when you can point back to the whys and say, we're doing this to support XYZ objective, or we're doing this because we feel we're a collaborative organization, need to be together, or whatever the right reasons are, that's what needs to get communicated out back to employees so that they feel like whatever decisions are being made they have been listened to and it's been considered, and this is the best decision moving forward, versus an employee, like you said, Bruce, saying, hey, I told you what my opinion was and you guys just didn't listen. So why are you doing this to us? Why are you doing this to me? It becomes more of a narrative of, we're doing this for the company because, we've decided that this is the right direction. It supports our goals. It supports our business objectives. And usually people will get on board with that. But yes, definitely change management is going to be a huge part of the return to work, and the companies that understand that and make it a part of their strategy are the ones that are probably going to be a little bit more successful in getting people onboarded with that idea too.
Well, we start our assignments by looking at one premise, and that is your workplace ought to be a competitive advantage. And whether that has to do with productivity or culture or image or how it impacts recruiting, how the companies are going to handle this COVID impact is ultimately going to weigh in on that very element. And that is, I think employees are going to ask questions as they look at, or people looking at joining your firm are going to look at work from home policy and how your space is laid out, et cetera. So these are big decisions, and they're decisions that are a lot of them, as far as the space layout, et cetera, are hard to reverse. So let me move to the second category, the second big topic, and that is how it's impacted workplace strategies. And the impact, to me, the two big things are work from home policy and technology. So let me start with work from home policy. Companies are having now to integrate a work from home policy into their overall workplace strategy. And Michelle, working in a law firm, I think maybe it's best I can start this question with you. Might you mandate at some point a return to the office?
So we talked a little bit about this. So I sat down with an attorney or virtually and had a conversation about what we can mandate. And so right now, what is the legal term of vulnerable people that's out in the state order? We still have a state order in effect, and we cannot mandate anybody that fits that vulnerable category to return to work right now. And the Families First Coronavirus Act is still in place. So people that have childcare issues still have some options under the law. So even though the vaccine is starting to come out, and it has come out here in Colorado, there still are laws in place. And until those orders lift, we really can't mandate anybody. Now, if you are a healthy individual with no pre-existing conditions and you don't have any, you're not classified as vulnerable, we can push you to come back into the office. But the orders here in Colorado still say, even if we're essential, that people that can work from home successfully and have proven that they can work from home should continue to work from home. And so at this point in time, we're just not close to that, still following the order in place. There is no mandate. Now, what that will look like in 6 months, and, as Jillian kind of talked too about how we're going to bring people back, I don't believe there's just going to be, hey, everybody's back on Monday and we're all going to show up and it's going to be just like it was. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. So I really don't think there's ever going to be a true mandate, but we still are pretty far. I think we're excited about the vaccine, but we're pretty far away from doing that. There's still a lot of things in play that prohibit us from making that decision.
Travis, do you think you're going to mandate a return after, the vaccine gets as distributed as it can be, let's say?
I don't really expect that. We've been fairly laissez-faire throughout this, and the nature of our work as an accounting firm lends itself well to working from home. So I don't know that we feel compelled that we're losing so much productivity. We got to get back in the office.
Oh, they're going to love that new office space too, Travis. I know they're going to come to work.
We'll see in 6 months when we move in. We don't want tumbleweeds blowing through there.
Jillian, do you hear talk about companies feeling comfortable with mandating that you can't return unless you've got the vaccine?
No, I don't think there's going to be any sort of a mandate in 2021. My best guess is that most companies will take the soft-handed approach. Again, kind of make it feel more like a celebration. We get to go back versus you have to go back, and kind of then, rely on peer pressure to to let people start to come back. But I can't foresee anybody making it a mandate. Pretty much anytime that there's still any state orders in effect, I would think that's probably at least 2022. I could foresee that.
Yeah. Travis, I've read your work from home policy, so I know you've developed one. Did you have one before? I suspect not, as I recall.
Well, ironically, like I mentioned, we had some remote workers outside of the state, but for local people, there was a lot of resistance about allowing that. But we had just been in the process of developing a company-wide policy when all this hit in March. So we kind of paused on that and just had to deal with the crisis and came back to it. It's kind of, I would say, still in draft form. I don't know that we've and widely disseminated it.
Yeah, I may have read the most recent draft. I was going to ask if it had been adopted. I found it interesting, a couple pieces of that said, if you could correct me if I'm wrong here, but that said you couldn't work from home unless you'd been with the company and worked at the office for 6 months, that your manager needed to approve it. You couldn't just call up one day and say, I'm working from home from now on. You had to give a couple weeks, I think it was, certain advance notice.
Yeah,
but
get an approval.
I think developing a written work from home policy is going to be important for to keep the chaos to a minimum if there is chaos, and also so that people don't feel that others are being favored, and so setting out criteria, etc. Michelle, how about you? Will your firm have a written work from home policy and guidelines, etc.?
So I actually am in the process of updating our employee handbook. And one thing that's kind of a funny thing to think about is, prior to this, one of our other big issues with staff was, what was our inclement weather policy? Like how did we judge that? How could we announce that? And in working on the handbook now, that whole policy that was written out about earlier this year, when we were trying to get this out the door earlier, it's gone. We don't need to do that anymore. There are no snow days now. We know we can all work from home. And so it's funny because that was a policy that was being launched, and work from home was a policy that wasn't really being launched. And that's just completely traded places. So kind of a funny antidote to the handbook there. But we have a very general work from home policy that's coming out in our handbook in January. Now, we will work on that further because there's a lot more to discuss as this return really happens. And like Jillian said, it's probably not going to be 2021. We're going to be pretty flexible throughout the year because there's a lot of people that aren't going to get the vaccine until summer, fall, possibly. And there's a lot of what ifs on the vaccine itself still, in my opinion. But right now, our work from home is pretty general. We don't supply all of your computer equipment. We give you some of it. There's a lot to think about there too. What's the liability we need to talk to in terms of workers' comp issues when someone's working at home? And so we have not gotten into the weeds with that. And because we are a law firm and I'm surrounded by lawyers, our policy will likely be pretty in the weeds, requiring certain things from people. I will tell you one thing that we have discussed based on the last poll is that we will not have a dedicated workspace for you if you are a majority work from home person. So that will be a sacrifice. We've also talked about other incentives that the people that are coming to the office might have that the work from home people wouldn't have. Some of that might be a shorter work week. If you work from home, we're going to say that, you're not really there 40 hours a week working, your work week might be reduced to 35 hours a week kind of thing. So we've kind of gone back and forth of weighing some of the incentives, weighing the workers' comp, the employment issues around that. I will say we did allow one employee to move out of state. I have heard others that would like to make the same request, but taking on new employment issues, taxes in other states, that's kind of a no-no, I think, for us going forward. We kind of have the one exception, and I will say that person is planning to retire next year, so it was an easier yes to just deal with it for a short period of time. But unlike Travis, we were a one office firm here in Colorado, and we would still like to keep the bulk of our employees here and working, and at least visiting the office regularly in some capacity.
Yeah, certainly the impact on ability to train and mentor new hires or younger employees, and maintaining a culture is something that having people at the office is easier to accomplish those things. I think everyone would agree in general. Jillian, there's been a couple of announcements from companies that they're going to go 100% remote working. And I'm wondering if what you've seen so far, you think that those are outliers and really radical ideas, or even if somebody decides they're going to go to 75% work from home. What's your sense of how much of that we're going to see?
Yeah, I think, some of the companies that early on said, hey, we're going 100% remote, I think a lot of that, quite honestly, was some headlines. I think that it was a way for some of these leading companies to share some news that a lot of companies were just kind of, doing or working towards. Obviously, 4 months ago, if somebody said you're going to be 100% remote until June, at that point, it was still a little bit of a, oh my gosh, 100% until June, that sounds like a long time. And now we're like, yeah, that's probably everybody. I do think that the companies that are saying this probably already had some programs in place that they were exploring to either introduce remote work as a whole in a broader scale, or they were likely already doing it. So for a company that was traditionally in the office, maybe didn't have quite so formal of a remote work policy, to go 100% remote, that's a big stretch, it's a big push, and then there's also a lot that has to go into the planning of that for long-term, for the things that we've mentioned here, work from home policies, and what happens then with the real estate, and what happens with employee policies. So I think, from that standpoint, I'm not seeing companies really embracing that, but if they were sort of on that track already or thinking about introducing it, they probably amplified that announcement and message a little bit more. I will say that for the most part, the workforce for the last 10, 15 years has really been a lot more mobile and remote already. It's just that office design really wasn't supporting that so much in the first place. So now, now that this has happened, it's kind of shined a light on that, where, okay, let's think now about office space and how that can better support a more remote workforce. But I think on a broad scale, what's likely going to happen is that all companies will have some portion of their staff that will be more flexible, more work from home than others. There's still going to be kind of that core section that's probably mostly in the office, maybe 1 to 2 days a week from home. And then that's probably, I'd say that's probably about 50% of your workers, 60% of your workers. And the outliers are going to be the ones that are full-time in the office or full-time at home. That hybrid model is really, I think, where I see a lot of people landing.
So I'll stay with you on this. Obviously, the other piece of this, is the technology investments that companies have made and are going to have to continue to make, whether it's Zoom or Teams or, technology for calls like this, or whether it's a reservation policy, which sounds like what it takes these days to ski, but a reservation policy as to making sure if I'm coming in the office tomorrow, I have a conference room, or I know I've got a private office waiting for me or not, et cetera. What sort of technology investments are you seeing companies evaluate?
Yeah, so I think the first technology investment is definitely making sure that employees have laptops, and then Zoom, Teams, whatever the right platform is. So kind of that's what I would consider the basic tool for promoting this out of office collaboration. Where it then tends to go is that there's then the next step of, okay, let's also make sure that for the office, all of our spaces have the right technology as well. Because what will happen is that when people do go back, there's still going to be some portion of the workforce that's remote. So where we left in March, maybe we didn't need to have all of our conference rooms equipped with AV and Zoom screens, et cetera, because the expectation was that the majority would be in the office. Well, now that's kind of shifted. So now we need to go back and start to say, okay, does every conference room have technology? Do we have enough small focus rooms and private spaces where an employee can go, take a phone call? Because really that merging of in-office and remote employees is going to be a big factor that employees and companies will have to figure out about their spaces. And then after that, like you're saying, there's a space reservation. So if you do have some portion of your space that's going to be dedicated to hoteling, hot desking, shared space, whatever you want to call it, there does have to be, some knowledge for an employee coming in that if I go into the office, I know where I'm going, I know what seat I'm going to be at, and I know who's going to be around me. So there's been a lot of technologies that have been, again, either around but maybe not widely used, or have developed recently to assist with space management and reservation systems. So now, if an employee is primarily remote work, but they're planning on going in for a day or two to collaborate on a project, they can go in ahead of time, reserve a seat, reserve a meeting room, reserve a portion of a collaborative area, and make sure that they know where they're heading in so that they can go in and, just get to work right away, essentially, and not worry about, okay, if I drive in 25 minutes, will I have a spot? Will I know who's going to be there? Or is it going to be a waste of my time and day? And I think without that technology to balance sort of the reservations, offices could be underutilized in that sense.
Well, I remember just before COVID hit, Charlie Lutz, who I think is on this call, and I had been in to see a local office, good-sized office of a national firm, and they had adopted a 100% hoteling, if that's the right terminology. In other words, there were no dedicated workspaces for anyone. And the, I think, unintended consequence was that senior leadership, who were used to their private offices and maybe didn't like the hassle of having to make a reservation, essentially stopped coming to the office. I think it's pretty hard to lead from home. And I think it's also, I think it's difficult to create a culture when your leaders are not coming to the office. And so there's lots of ripple effects that are coming about that have to be considered on all of this. Travis, are you writing checks for different technology investments right now? And do you think you're going to have to keep making them? And do you think you're going to have a reservation system?
Yeah, we haven't talked about reservations down to individual offices. We definitely have planned for an integrated system. The particular brand we went with is called Evoco, but they have these nice touch pads outside of each conference room. So we're definitely doing that. Similar to Michelle, we had been a little bit lucky in our technology investment. Prior to COVID, we had been midstream in kind of a digital transformation of going to the cloud on some of our key software systems. So that's continued throughout COVID. And I think that's been very valuable for us. One thing I was going to mention on this topic, Bruce, is we've kind of elected to go all in on Teams, Microsoft Teams, meaning we're going to the E5 level of Microsoft, having dedicated phone numbers through Teams and all of our audio conferencing through Teams. So we are moving away from desktop phones almost completely. A couple of old guard people still want a phone on their desk, but 80-90% of the people are not going to have phones, and it's going to be all through Teams. We will have some headsets, but we wanted to be fully mobile for this and other purposes. And so that's something we've just decided in the last couple of months.
Yeah, yeah. My grandkids are going to say, "What, a phone on your desk? What's that?" Michelle, I hate to generalize, but I just would guess that a number of your attorneys would not be happy with losing their own private office. Is that a fair statement? And how are you approaching this?
I would say it's definitely split through the generations. The
Yeah.
younger attorneys are not as excited to come back to the office. And it kind of is a level of technology comfort. We have deployed a lot of technology this year. It has been overwhelming for some of these senior attorneys that don't love new stuff. It's continuing to come. That was kind of in the plans before COVID hit, but you know, it really is generational. You know, millennials long before COVID, you know, wanted this flexibility in their workday. We were already seeing that, you know, they were more about lifestyle, which is very much how our firm operates. And so that was already a trend with, you know, the kind of next generation coming into the workforce. So we're just seeing it more and more. And frankly, we've done all of the things you guys have talked about. We've updated rooms this year that wasn't initially in the budget. We had one conference room. Again, we're a local office. Majority of our clients live here in the Denver metro area or in Colorado. And so now we have, I think, six conference rooms that are equipped to do Zoom calls and videos. We overhauled our phone system this year, so you can access your work phone through your computer at home. You can access it through an app on your cell phone now and take your work computer. So we have the same kind of setup that Travis is talking about. We have Zoom, we have Teams, we use web apps through the courts. And one of the kind of funny ones for law firms is lawyers love their books. They love to reference books, and we spend tons of money on getting new editions of books this year. And there was a big section of books that came due that was also part of our online subscription. And I didn't get the books, and nobody's been in the office to notice we don't have the books this year. So I saved $20,000 on books, and it was kind of like, I'm sure at some point in time, someone's going to figure it out. But I mean, it's amazing the level of technology that has come out. And I mean, I will even share last night, I signed a pretty big contract that's going to overhaul our financial system and billing system next year. That was already something we were going in that direction, but you know, taking our bills completely electronic, we've kind of got there this year, not the best way we wanted to, but you know, yeah, we continue to spend money on technology. And I think that, you know, at some point in time for us, our technology spend could beat out our commercial real estate spend.
Well, there's a switch. Jillian, what did I miss? Are there emerging technologies that they didn't mention that you see coming or that are being talked about?
There, you know, we've kind of touched on a lot of it. I think there will be more and more technologies, and I think that, you know, what's going to be interesting is to see the innovations that come from this, right? A lot of times these inventions, new technologies are there to solve problems, and there's been problems that we've now, you know, noticed and actually have now become problems as part of the pandemic that we never knew were something that we needed to solve for before. So for example, you know, like I said, working from home, if you have other people that are also working from home in your household, trying to take simultaneous calls at the same time, you know, being 10 feet from another person that's on a Zoom call the same time as you are, it just doesn't work. So going back to the office, I think there's going to be more focus on solving some of those problems that now may be coming up as the workforce becomes more distributed.
Yeah. So Michelle and Travis, it's interesting, your comments about the generational difference. And I say that in the sense that as you look down the road to recruiting new attorneys, for example, you don't anticipate a problem if the question to you is, will I have my own office? You think that that will be the new norm, that won't be a treasured.
We were already there with that younger group. I think, you know, I there's surveys that I was watching last year that a dedicated office space was not something that younger group was looking for. I think the question more so that, and I have already been faced with, because I have a new paralegal onboarding right at the end of this month. And one of the questions during her onboarding, and again, this is staff, not even attorney, was, can I work at home? Can I have a balance of that? I have another paralegal that was looking towards retirement. That was no secret, and has now said, if I can continue working at home, I'm happy to work a couple more years. And so I'm really seeing that switch. And while I have a lot of attorneys that do love that corner office, and I have a couple that come in every day, they want to be in the office there and they love it, and they're the ones that want to see everybody back. The reality is, it's not just our decision as a business. We are going to be forced to do this based on what the businesses around us do, what the new work culture is in our world. And that is going to play into recruiting. If people are coming in and asking, do you have a work from home policy? Do you give out laptops or cell phones or whatever it may be, that whatever technology thing they want, we're going to have to be competitive to get the right workforce there and to retain our people with that. So as much as I have to make the office a magnet for people to come back, I also have to have the right stuff to deploy for the people that don't want to be in the office. So, yes, I think there's those senior people that want those offices, but I don't think that will be a problem in the future of recruiting.
Yeah. So Jillian, I know you've worked with a lot of companies on looking at how they might change their space plan, how they're using their space. Tell us a little bit about those conversations. Because social distancing is an issue, certainly for firms that have gone in and have high density space plans, et cetera. Having space plans that perhaps feature the common areas of various kinds, given what Michelle and Travis have said about maybe the diminishing importance of one person, one office. What are you seeing as companies evaluate how to change their space, their layout?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we were early on in the pandemic and looking at plans with people, it was all around social distancing, right? So we took a look and we said, how many people can we actually have in this space at one time if we're following social distancing protocol, and how many people should be in this conference room that used to hold 12, and what should we do about the break room? And now the conversations have evolved a little bit more into, okay, we know that when we go back, and this is, I think, true for most companies, unless they were already in the process of making space changes, not a lot of companies right now are spending the money to modify their current space until they're a little bit more sure about what the future of work looks like.
Yeah.
So now I would say, though, those conversations are starting back up again. And now I think that, vaccine news is in sight, and there's a good chance that vaccinations will be kind of widespread in 2021 and later on. I think companies are being able to just look at it a little more carefully again and say, okay, what might we change? And the two questions that we tend to try to answer for clients during some of these conversations and exercises are, one, can we reduce our space? Because the thought is, if 50% of our workforce isn't going to be there at any given time, can we reduce space? Or two, do we keep the same space and then actually try to modify it and better utilize it to support this new work style that we're implementing? So those are kind of the two questions that companies seem to be asking. We've been helping, and I actually have, I think I can share, oh no, I can't share my screen. We've got some floor plans that maybe we can make available as part of a handout to help illustrate, what happens in a 30,000 square foot office when it's still, it's a one-to-one assigned seating, so one desk or workstation or office per employee, and sort of that status quo that maybe what's, now, even if it was a more modern layout, now a more traditional mindset of having everybody in the office. And you can support a certain amount of people with that one-to-one. When we change the mindset a little bit and start to look at, okay, maybe either a portion of our people can be remote and coming into more shared space, what happens then? And what happens if we start to put in more meeting areas or more collaborative areas? How many employees could we launch by actually maybe saying, all right, our employee to seat ratio is maybe 1.5 to 1. So 1.5 employees are sharing a desk at some point. Again, there's the technology question of how do we manage that from a reservation perspective and making sure that there is space when people come in. And then some companies now are actually even taking that a step further and saying, what if our office now becomes not so much a place to come work, but actually more of a place to meet? And this is, the collaboration hub, and our office really kind of becomes this clubhouse for our culture, for our brand. And what does that look like? And what happens when we start to really, take that idea farther? So those are kind of some of these bigger questions that companies are asking, different reasons. Companies might be looking at space consolidations and square footage reductions from a financial aspect, or so that they can invest more in technology. And some are saying, okay, we're on a 10-year lease, we're 2 years in, so we know we're going to be here for a while. Let's maybe look at making some changes so we can make this last for the workforce to come.
Travis, I remember you making a comment that I thought was spot on. And he was looking at his space plan, and there were parts of his space plan where social distancing was not being honored, let's call it. And I said to him, if we make it all the way back and you are at 100% capacity in this new space, and we have another COVID-22 or some surge or what have you, what will you do? And his answer was quick, and it was right on. He said, we've learned that we can work from home and we can accomplish the social distancing that maybe the plan doesn't accommodate in some areas by hitting the work from home button. And I think that flexibility, it's a nice release valve. It's a nice call the bullpen. We're going to go to the work from home and still have a space that works for everybody. I'm wondering, and this is not really for Travis because he's moving into a relationship with a new landlord, but Michelle, has your landlord reached out to you as a tenant and communicated what they're doing to try to mitigate and control any spread?
Yeah, I would actually say they've done a pretty good job. We are in a Brookfield property, and Brookfield has properties all over the world. And I will say, they took surveys as well throughout about what we were doing. They, asked for updates about our plans pretty often. They announce when there's breakouts in the building, so they've really communicated. I don't think that they've really gotten into the future quite yet. The interesting thing about our property, we are, for those of you familiar with all of downtown Denver, I think everybody here is, we're in 1801 California. And when we moved into the building, it had just been renovated. So we're completing our 6th year in our 10-year lease right now. And so we were a new tenant, as is majority of the building. So the interesting thing about our building that will come up is that I think a lot of their leases are going to run out in the same time frame as ours. And it'll be interesting to see kind of how many people really want to stay in it and what they've done to keep us all in there. But, right now, the little shop in the lobby is closed. There's very limited access to the cafe. There's no gym right now. So they really haven't come out and told us kind of the long-term plans to get us back to full operations. Also parking, we're kind of looking at them to be a little more creative with parking. We offer parking to a lot of our people as an employee perk. It's expensive. We're paying for parking spots as well as, not just our space, but we're paying for parking spots right now that aren't being utilized. And that's another area we're going to have to get kind of creative with going into the future there. But, and hopefully those parking costs can come down in downtown Denver. That sure would be a delightful silver lining from COVID for us. But, yeah, they asked a lot of things. They've done a lot of surveys, just like we're doing with our businesses, but that long-term plan really isn't in place. And then just one other thought that attached to Jillian's comments before. The other thing that we're really looking at in terms of our space in the long term would be how we do in-office events. So our event space is also going to be a big deal in us moving forward, and whether or not people are going to want to return to in-person seminars, they're going to kind of want to come visit the office. When we moved to 1801, creating more of an event space was a big deal for us. And just as it's going to be hard to get employees to come back, I question whether even our clients are going to want to come back. So just another kind of thought to throw out there, and thinking about your space.
Yeah.
For us, entertaining was a big thing. And a big chunk of our front of our office is event space that hasn't been utilized all year. So something else there to kind of throw out and attach to Ian's comments on space and what people are, and if people, would be interesting to hear from our attendees. Are you going to want to go back to event space, or is your preference going to be meetings like we're doing right now? Is it easier to catch an 8 a.m. Zoom webinar than to, go to a breakfast somewhere? So something else to see out there.
Yeah, that's for sure. I almost wonder if companies won't think consciously about employee-only events, just because I've certainly heard from more than one CEO concern about the impact on the culture and the glue and the connectivity and the productivity when people are not bumping into each other at the coffee machine, for lack of a better analogy. But spending time together builds a certain glue, and your company, I guess what I'm saying is, I feel like the office space is a glue in a way, or it provides at least the environment for a company to have an identity and for people to enjoy each other and work more productively with each other. And I think we're just going to have to see this unfold. This is the last category here, adjusting to the new normal. In that regard, Jillian, I'll start with you. How do you think companies are going to adjust to the new normal with respect to the need to train and mentor and creating a corporate culture that advances the company, or that keeps it together and keeps it on track?
Yeah, I think there's going to be an emergence of maybe a new definition of what culture actually is. And is it, the happy hours at the office? Is it the ping pong table in the break room? So it's kind of a more fun office. What exactly is it? And I think that companies will need to kind of consider it from all angles, really. And that's really what this pandemic's done for a lot of this, is that companies have had to consider the same thing in new perspectives and through new lenses. I think that for a lot of times, sometimes companies relied on the office to be the embodiment of that culture. And I think it can still be a part of it. It may not be the central portion of the space, or maybe for some companies, it might be their motivation to actually make their office more of the central hub for culture. But I do think it's going to be there's going to be more of a convergence between the workspace and the workforce, and where perhaps people had been kind of considering those as two separate things. I think that's going to change a little bit more, and companies will start to realize that there's got to be attention paid to both, and both have to work in tandem and support each other to really kind of build that cultural concept.
Well, I loved your clubhouse analogy. Janine is telling me, and I'm really glad to hear it, we have a number of questions, so we'll move to the Q&A. I do want to thank you, panel members, for me anyway, providing some great insights and good conversation. But Janine, I guess I kick it back to you to handle the Q&A, huh?
Yeah, and at this time, everybody on the call can turn on their video if they'd like, or unmute their lines. I do have a question or two to kick off, but we definitely want to get the audience to, if you want to ask a question. These came in throughout the session, and one I think is probably top of mind for many, and I want to ask that one first. And that is your company looking to implement guidelines for vaccines office space? And I think that's just a great question. Many people are probably thinking about. Michelle, is your tenants doing anything on that, or your
To
management?
implement to actually make people take the vaccine? Is that kind of the
Well,
question?
yeah, it could be interpreted that way. I interpret it as, you're going to have people not take the vaccine, people take the vaccine. You have office space, people coming in. Is the management company doing anything? Is there something that you all are talking about?
So, while I'm not a lawyer, obviously I spend a lot of time with them, and I will give you the lawyer answer on that. We're hopeful that we'll see some legislation that's going to help businesses kind of push the vaccine to employees and put it out there. There are definitely things you need to think about when it comes to that. There are people that are going to need accommodations based on disability, potentially religion. It's not going to just be an easy thing to just say, we want everybody to take the vaccine before they come back to the office. And so, that's one of those things where I would encourage you to consult with your lawyer. I'm happy to help you find a lawyer if you want to do that. But, obviously we'd love to see people take it. That would be my opinion, that people would take it and return to work. The building management hasn't really come out with anything on that, but they would have the same issues, to kind of put it on their tenants. And so really with that out there, I would anticipate we're going to see legislation around what we can do to make people take the vaccine in the employment context.
Makes sense. Anyone else want to
That
weigh
would
in?
be my response as well. What Michelle said, it's a tricky issue, and we haven't really addressed it here, but it may be hard to mandate it to every person. Just encourage, I don't know what technical term you use, but that's how we probably approach it.
Another question. Are you looking to downsize your brick and mortar office presence in the next 1 to 5 years? May have touched on that a little bit already.
Yeah, we just signed a 10-year lease, so I guess that's our answer.
Yeah.
Optimistic about the future.
Is your office space smaller, Travis?
We're in about 34,000 square feet roughly right now. And when we started out before COVID hit, we were looking for about 40,000. And with COVID, we dialed that back to about where we're at. We've outgrown it, and it's inefficiently used. So the new space will get a lot more packed in for the same amount of square footage. And that was ultimately what determined for us to move forward.
I think for us, it's a little too early to tell. As I mentioned, we're not quite to the end of our lease, so I have a little bit of luxury of time to see how things shake out. I could see us staying in the space. We have about 27,000 square feet, if I remember correctly. And so, it could be that we renovate and that we knock down walls for, again, more collaboration rooms. And, that's something that we kind of already needed. We needed more what we call war rooms, especially for our litigation attorneys. They like to spread out and stay in there. And, they hunker down in there until, as they're doing trial prep and whatnot. So I think for us, it's still too early to tell. In terms of kind of doing a space mining exercise, that's definitely something our future of work committee would like to do and see what we really need in the office. But, the space just might be entertainment. It might be other things. It's kind of been a little bit of a joke, but since the gym's been closed and, we have new fitness initiatives virtually for people and different things, we've talked about, should we add gym equipment into our floor and put things in that are, more of a draw? Like we kind of joke that the Peloton could be that for us. The building doesn't have that kind of cool stuff. So maybe we'll do something different with the space. But we also could downsize, if we go with industry standards for law firms and where they're headed in the direction, on kind of square footage by attorney is what most firms do. We could also cut our space in half.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to pause and see if anybody wants to come off mute and ask a question. Otherwise, I will keep firing away. I have one other great question, but certainly want to get y'all's questions answered. Keith, do you got a question?
I do. And I had to step away for a couple minutes, but sorry if you guys have addressed this already. But we talked about culture, or you talked about culture at least a little bit during the process. And I get that, competitively with other companies, we're going to have to deal with it as well. But how do you maintain a company culture in such a radical disruption of where nobody's in the office anymore? No, nobody's talking to anybody in person. I've been, in my opinion, fortunate because I've been in our office since early July, our new office, which is a magnet and definitely helps. But how do you keep that personal touch, that personal interaction that's critical to company culture in an era like this?
Michelle, you want to take that?
Yeah, I would say we are a pretty fun culture at Fairfield and Woods. I would say we're unique in that as a law firm. I think that a lot of people would say that our firm is very collegial and we do a lot of fun things. So one very easy answer I would say is gift cards. I give out a lot of gift cards to get people to show up to fun virtual meetings. And so we do a lot of stuff where we kind of gather virtually. But, we also maybe we took a little bit of a risk, but during the summer when we could be outdoors, we rented an outdoor patio space at a restaurant here in downtown, bought out the whole patio. And, obviously we had to comply with COVID, and thank goodness looking back, there were no breakouts or anything, but our people still wanted to come together, and they were very excited. I was actually surprised how many people came on a Friday afternoon to connect with each other. And so for us, we still offered a lot. We did, and we didn't, obviously, like everybody, didn't have a holiday party this year, but we offered holiday experiences. And so there were some outdoor things like zoo lights. We, offered it. You could go to zoo lights, or we offered a Larimer Square package. We also offered a virtual wine tasting, and people picked different packages and different groups came together. And so I'm very lucky to have a marketing manager that comes up with creative ideas on how to pull people together. We launched a fitness initiative this year, as I mentioned, so we have people on those teams. We launched a wellness initiative this year that'll carry through next year. So we did a lot of things to still bring our people together. We have a weekly newsletter that we never had. Obviously, being a one office firm, we didn't need a newsletter, but people are featured in that newsletter. We do fun games in that newsletter every week. And so we've just created all these different avenues that people could come together. We have a Facebook group that is mostly people sharing funny COVID memes on a regular basis. But I think everybody's kind of attached to something different that we've rolled out. And so it's just about finding those avenues to connect people still. And again, I'm lucky I have a team that's been pretty creative in doing that for me.
That's awesome. Any other questions? I'm going to ask this one. We have 1 minute left. It's a great one. And it's directed to you, Bruce. Lots of great information on office environments. Seems like a lot of companies don't go fully back in the office. We could see a lot of inventory and commercial space on the market in the next few years. Could Bruce share some thoughts on retail and warehouse spaces and what we might expect to see in those markets?
So that specifically on retail and warehouse, that question was asked?
Yes.
Yeah. So some of you know that I concentrate on office space, but we have a group that works on industrial. And I have had some experience of late with different people on the retail level. I would say a couple things, and I'll touch all three markets. One, we're predicting based on some models where, boy, you just play with the sensitivities, that the office vacancy, which was at 11% before this started in Denver Metro, will double. That's not true for the warehouse market. The warehouse market, because of all of the use of Amazon and other ordering and ship by mailed or truck or whatever to your front door, the industrial market has remained strong. Let's put it this way: it's hard to find a good deal. Let's put it that way in the warehouse market, whereas in the office market, boy, free rent's gone up, rates have come down, et cetera. On retail, you know, my comment would be that, and frankly, this was my comment even before COVID, because some of my clients have looked at and have leased what used to be retail space. Certainly the Amazon phenomena was hurting the retail buildings in the first place. And I have a client who took a 40,000 square foot space in a strip retail center. And he might have just as easily gone into a Class B office building, but these retail projects were hurting. And so the economics were just that much better. And I think the reuse or the readaptation of retail is one of the biggest things that's going to happen. What it's going to be, I don't know. I heard something about a Nordstrom. I believe it was here in Denver where someone was going to convert it to some sort of co-working space. And I was wondering how that's going to work. So you've got retail struggling, you've got office that will make better deals right now, and you have owners of warehouses who are doing just fine. I guess that would be my 30,000 foot view.
That's excellent. Thank you for that, Bruce. And thank you all for such a fantastic program. A lot of great insights on, you know, still a time where we're, you know, uncertain. And we're just, I think that's what 2020 has taught us, to make a plan, but be nimble and flexible when you can't execute on that plan. And it really has accelerated what was already to come, but it is now in the now in technology and things. And so interesting and mindful. So very cool. Fill out the survey to all of you still on before you bounce. That would be fantastic. And it helps us know if we're hitting the mark and if you have any programs that you'd like us to do next year. Hopefully sometime soon we will be meeting in person at RSM offices. Hopefully this vaccine is going to give us a little bit more freedom, but it still remains to be seen. June 19th is our next program on cybersecurity, and look for that registration in your inbox. Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays and have a good rest of the week.